What's up, guys? Welcome to Cleared for Landing. Today we're going to talk about how to start your journey to becoming a pilot in 2024 and what I would do differently if I was starting all over again. What's up, guys? My name's Steve. Or is it Ben? I'm a career firefighter and paramedic, accomplished nightclub DJ and producer, avid traveler, and man of 1,000 hobbies. That's me. That's me. And that's me. Oh, and I was also on TV for a while.
Down to 20. Steve, take over from me.
That's me right there. You're not here because of that. You're here because this is me. I've decided to work my way up from zero training to instrument-rated commercial pilot, and I'm taking you along on the journey with me. We may hit some turbulence along the way, but I'm okay with that. Welcome to my channel.
Roger, runway 16, clear to land.
Runway 16, clear for landing. What's up, guys? I'm Steve, student pilot working my way towards instrument-rated commercial pilot. Today, I'm going to cover how to get started on your journey to becoming a pilot and what I would do differently if I could start all over again. So let's dive right in. First, let's talk about your pilot license. There are different levels and types of pilot licenses. For most people, though, the initial license they will get is called their private pilot license, or technically your private pilot certificate. In the United States, the FAA, or Federal Aviation Administration, is in charge of all pilot and aircraft-related rules and regulations, pilot training standards, and issuing of pilot certificates and ratings. They are the governing body behind all of aviation in the US. The FAA breaks down the certificates into student pilot, recreational pilot, private pilot, commercial pilot, and airline transport pilot. During your initial training, you will be required to obtain a student pilot certificate. This will come after you've had some instruction, and you'll need your certified flight instructor, or CFI, to fill out the paperwork with you to obtain this. And you won't be able to fly solo until you have this completed. But we'll touch more on that later. Above student pilot is recreational pilot. This certificate has limitations on types of aircraft that you're able to fly, distance you'll be able to fly, number of passengers you can have on board, and some other limitations. This certificate requires the least amount of hours, but due to the limitations, many people skip recreational pilot and go straight to their private pilot. Now let's look at commercial pilot. Your commercial pilot certificate is what you will need to be able to be compensated for flying. This will allow you to carry passengers and cargo for money. As a private or recreational pilot, you are not allowed to accept any compensation for flying, and the FAA does not mess around with this. So no flying and getting paid money under the table. It's a serious rule, and it should be taken seriously. For your commercial pilot, you'll first need to have your private pilot certificate, and you'll need to log at least 250 flight hours, 100 of which you must have been the pilot in command, or PIC. You'll also have to pass a written knowledge test and a check ride, which we'll talk more about in a minute. The highest level of pilot certification is called Airline Transport Pilot, or ATP. This certificate is exactly what it sounds like. It allows you to act as pilot for commercial airlines. This certificate is fairly involved and it has many prerequisite requirements that we won't go into here. But in general, you'll already need to have your commercial pilot certificate as well as 1,500 hours of flight time with specified hours in various types of flight. Now, finally, let's move on to private pilot certificate. The private pilot certificate is considered by most to be the standard first certificate, and you won't be able to move on to other certificates without first obtaining your private pilot certificate. I saved this for last because this is what we'll be focusing on today. Your private pilot training is where you'll learn all the basics that you'll build on later in your pilot career. Private pilot training includes ground school training, a written knowledge test, a minimum number of flight hours, including hours with specific skills and tasks. Once all of these are completed, you'll be required to complete what's called a check ride. During your check ride, you'll sit with an FAA examiner and complete an oral exam of your knowledge of aviation, as well as the specific certificate that you are pursuing. The flight portion of the check ride essentially combines all of these skills into one real-world type situation. Once you've successfully completed your check ride, you're officially a pilot. In addition to varying levels of certification, there are also ratings and endorsements. We won't worry too much about this for now, but both ratings and endorsements allow you to fly specialized aircraft or in specialized situations. Ratings will require additional instruction, a written exam, and a check ride, while endorsements require additional training and a logbook endorsement by a certified flight instructor that you've received the proper training and shown proficiency and understanding. Some common ratings include category ratings such as airplane or rotorcraft rated, or instrument rating, which will allow you to fly in weather with limited or no visibility. Some common endorsements include complex aircraft, high performance aircraft, or tailwheel aircraft endorsements. Now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about how to begin. The first thing you should do is find a local flight school and do an intro flight, sometimes called a discovery flight. This will be a flight to bring you up in a smaller aircraft similar to what you'll be training in and just fly around to see if you like it. The instructor will introduce you to the basics of the airplane, take you on a quick scenic trip, and likely give you some basic instruction in the air, usually letting you get your hands on the yoke and manipulate the aircraft for the very first time. The reason you should do this first is it would be a waste of your time to begin ground school only to later find out that flying doesn't really sit well with you. The other benefit of the intro flight is that it can actually be logged as your first flight time for your training. You can find a logbook like this on Amazon for about $10, and you'll want to bring this with you to your intro flight so the instructor can enter this flight into your logbook and sign it. During this video, I'm going to be showing you multiple things you will need and some optional things you can get. I've put links for these down in the description below. Okay, so you've done your first flight and you loved it. What's next? The next thing I would start on is your ground school training. Ground school is the knowledge and book portion of your training. This will introduce you to the basics of flight, parts of the aircraft, instruments, weather theory and weather services, airport operations, flight planning, and everything in between. Your ground school will provide you with all the knowledge you need to be familiar with to pass your written test. It covers all the things that aren't hands-on. I suggest doing your ground school first, or at least getting the majority of it completed for a few reasons. The first reason is that flying is expensive. With that in mind, minimizing the number of hours you are paying for the plane and your instructor is key. If you start flying and you have no knowledge base, that's just more hours spent with your instructor trying to teach you things you could have learned on the ground for a fraction of the cost. When you get in the air, you want to focus on the hands-on portion. This brings me to the other reason I suggest ground school first. It can be easy to get overwhelmed when you're working on your private pilot. For most of us, this is completely new material, and there's definitely a learning curve involved. Doing ground school first allows you to focus solely on learning the material and passing your written knowledge test. Focusing on ground knowledge while learning the hands-on knowledge may be difficult for most people. There are multiple ground schools that can be done online. I'm not going to recommend one in particular, but I've put links below to a few that I know to be reputable. When beginning your ground school training, there will be some things you need to have and a few things you want to have. Let's start with the books. I'll start by saying you don't necessarily need to purchase the books, but you will need access to them. The FAA provides all official training materials in PDF format on their site, but I did find it beneficial to have these physical copies of the books so that I could make notes in them. The first book you'll need is called the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, commonly referred to as the PHAK. This book provides essential knowledge that will be covered in your ground school, but as with the other manuals we will discuss, it's expected that you read these manuals in their entirety. The next book you'll need is the Airplane Flying Handbook. This provides information on the hands-on portion of the flying and discusses specific flight maneuvers and situations. You'll also need a copy of the Airman Certification Standards, or ACS. This will be your Bible for the standards you'll be required to meet to become a private pilot. The final book you'll be required to have, and maybe the most important book to have a physical copy of, is the Federal Aviation Regulations/Aeronautical Information Manual, commonly referred to as the FAR-AIM. This book is particularly helpful on the oral portion of your check ride, and many students will tab their FAR-AIM for easy reference during the check ride. This book provides every single regulation related to pilots, aircraft, airspace, air traffic control, you name it. That's it for the required books. Some books I would suggest are test prep manuals. Gleim makes written test prep and oral exam prep books. I have the oral exam prep book, and it's been very helpful, and it gives you insight into the type of questions you'll be asked during the oral exam. Along with the books, there are other items you will need and some you may want. First, you're gonna need a flight computer. This tool will allow you to make a wide range of calculations, including things like true airspeed, ground speed, wind correction angles, temperature conversions, and a bunch of others. You'll learn how to do all these calculations in your ground school training. There's many versions of flight computers. The most common is the E6B, which is this, but they make battery-powered calculator types with various extra features. I suggest just getting the classic metal E6B. Next, you'll need what's called a plotter. When learning navigation, you're going to need to calculate distances and times on a paper chart called a VFR sectional. These plotters are made to accurately measure distance and true course, so you definitely need that. You also are going to need the VFR sectional for the area you'll be flying in. I'm not going to be linking to this because it's location dependent and they expire every 56 days. so you need to buy these likely multiple times throughout your training. Talk to your flight instructor for assistance with this. Some other items that are helpful but not necessary. First is an iPad. I have an iPad mini 6. It's helpful because an iPad combined with the proper apps can be used for navigation instead of paper charts. Many people use a program called ForeFlight. I'll link to it below. I will caution you, as a student, you should focus first on the basics and know how to do things manually before you make your way into the techie stuff. Another thing that you'll need eventually is an aviation headset. I'll link to some cheap and expensive options below. There's really no rush to get this though. Most of the schools have loaner headsets, but in the long run, you'll probably need your own. So you're done or nearly done with ground school and you want to start flying. The next thing you'll need to do is decide where you want to train. The FAA divides flight schools into two different types, Part 61 and Part 141. Part 141 tends to be geared towards those who have a goal of being a pilot as a career. These are very regimented, full-time training programs that generally take you from no training all the way to your airline transport pilot. These schools can be expensive and for most would require substantial student loans. I'm not going to be focusing on 141, primarily because I have limited knowledge of them and because it seems that most people who want to get their private pilot but aren't trying to get hired by major airlines go with Part 61, which is what I did. Part 61 allows you to get your ground school training on your own, pick your instructor and your school, and perform the flight hours at your own pace. When looking into a flight school, there are many factors to consider, and this is the one thing I would approach differently if I could start all over again. When selecting a school, the biggest thing to do is research. Check reviews of the school, ask about their safety record, talk to other students who have gone there, and try to get their candid opinions of what they liked and didn't like. There are also other factors to consider, such as how close is the school to where you live? Will you drive an hour for every single lesson? What kind of fleet does the school have? Do they have older Cessna 172s that aren't updated, or do they have a newer fleet with updated avionics and instrument ratings that will help you continue on with your training after private pilot? Cost is another factor, but many of the rental costs are comparable, so this shouldn't be a deciding factor. I would also check into multiple schools and try a few different instructors prior to choosing one. Instructors are people too, and they'll have different personality types and teaching styles. One of the most important things in this journey is training with someone you get along with and who instructs in a way that matches your learning style. I'm saying this because I didn't follow this advice, and I've added thousands of dollars to my training because of it. I chose an instructor who is highly rated, and for good reason, but his teaching style didn't match my learning style, and ultimately I ended up switching schools over 20 hours into my instruction. So I had to backpedal a little bit and start over with this other school. So now you've selected a school, your ground training and maybe your written knowledge test is done. How many hours do you need? What will be required of you? And what can you expect this all to look like? For Part 61, the FAA requires a minimum of 40 total flight hours. 20 of these hours must be with a certified flight instructor, 10 of these hours must be solo flight, 3 of these hours must be at night, and 3 of them must be in Simulated Instrument Flight Rules, or IFR. As a private pilot, you'll learn first to fly by visual reference to the ground, which means no flying in the clouds or limited visibility. After you earn your private pilot certificate, you can move on to an instrument rating, which will allow you to fly in no visibility solely by use of the instruments. The reason you need 3 hours of simulated instrument training for your private pilot is so you can get yourself safely out of those conditions should you inadvertently fly into them. And finally, you also need 3 hours of solo cross-country flight. The FAA defines cross-country flight as landing at a different airport than you departed from, and that airport must be at least 50 nautical miles in a straight line away from the airport you departed from. This is a lot of things to keep track of and get done, but don't worry, your instructor is there to guide you through this entire process. During your flight instruction, you'll learn the basics of takeoffs and landings in both normal, abnormal, and emergency situations, as well as various flight maneuvers you must become proficient at. These include steep turns, ground reference maneuvers, slow flight, stalls, talking to air traffic control, also called ATC, and navigation, among other things. Many people are surprised that training to be a pilot includes flying by yourself when you're not actually a pilot. Before you can do this, however, there are a few things you need to have done. The first is you will need to pass an FAA medical exam. The exams are divided into Class 1, 2, and 3. First class is the highest level and comes with the most extensive testing and scrutiny, and requires more frequent visits to stay current. For private pilot, you'll need to have a third class medical. This will include basic vital signs, blood work, hearing and vision tests, and a basic checkup. I'd suggest getting this scheduled and completed as soon as you start your flight training, because depending on where you live, it may be difficult to get an appointment, and you don't want to be waiting to solo because you don't have your medical yet. In addition to the medical exam, you'll need a student pilot certificate. This requires filling out an application with the FAA with the assistance of your instructor, and your instructor has to fill out some things as well and then submit it by mail or electronically. This takes a while, so I would get this done as soon as possible as well. The very last thing you'll need to start your solo flight is an endorsement from your instructor. After you've proven proficiency in takeoffs and landings, airport operations, knowledge, and basic flight maneuvers, your instructor can give you this endorsement. But don't be surprised if you don't get signed off at 20 hours. Don't rush it. I would suggest you focus on getting better every single flight and immersing yourself in the knowledge and practical skills as much as you can. Solo flight's gonna come when you are truly ready, and it shouldn't come a minute before. All right, guys, so I'm pausing this video right here to let you know there's a lot of information in this video. So to make it a little easier, I went ahead and made a PDF document called the Private Pilot Roadmap. You can download it below for free, so go check it out. Wow. Okay, that was a lot. Are you guys still with me? Great. So, ground school is done. Written exam is done. Flight hours and requirements are almost completed, and your check ride is scheduled. How do you know what standards you'll be tested to? This is where that FAA Airman Certification Standards, or ACS book, comes in. The Airman Certification Standards lays out the maneuvers and knowledge you must demonstrate for your check ride. For each maneuver, it will lay out required tasks, the standards you must meet for that task, and points that will cause you to fail the procedure. You must complete each maneuver within the standards set out in the ACS. Finally, let's look at your check ride day. The check ride is split up into two sections, the oral portion and the practical portion. The oral portion can last a few hours, but it's less of a high pressure, quick question and answer test and more of a conversational test about aviation. Your examiner is trying to assess your knowledge base and your overall understanding of the content. It's not essential that you know the answer to every single question you get asked, but if you don't know the answer, you must know how to use your resources to find the answers you don't know. It's an open book test, but your knowledge base must meet the requirements. If you think about it, this examiner is tasked with figuring out if you are someone who is knowledgeable enough to fly an airplane and not cause danger to yourself and those around you. That's quite the responsibility. After the oral exam portion of your check ride, you'll move on to the practical portion of your check ride. Prior to the day of your check ride, you'll have planned a flight to take with your instructor. For this flight, you as the student must treat it as if you're already a private pilot. You must plan every aspect of a flight. This will include knowing applicable information on both the airport you're departing from and where you'll be landing, weather along the route, wind direction and speed, checkpoints along the way, estimated total flight time based on your aircraft performance charts, and info about airports along the way in case you need to divert. Hint, hint, you will need to divert. That's part of the check ride. During this flight, you'll be required to perform a series of maneuvers and standards laid out in the ACS. Now, if all of this sounds like a lot, don't worry, it is a lot, but you have to remember, pilot training is a marathon, not a sprint. By the time you get to your check ride, you'll have done all of these things individually multiple times. You're now just combining them to show your skills. Try to relax and take your training one step at a time. You will get there. It may feel slow at times, overwhelming at times, or even discouraging at times. Stay the course. Once you're a pilot forever. And every other pilot out there had to go through this as well. Do your best to enjoy the ride. You only complete your initial training once, so definitely make the most of it. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and feel free to shoot me a message or a comment with any questions. I love answering questions. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time on Cleared for Landing.